Hello, everyone. Welcome to Central Nervous System's Acumatica training class on approval maps today. Just give it a moment here so others can join. All right. So, training classes, Central Nervous Systems here. We offer weekly training classes covering different topics. Um, these topics can be used to help introduce you to the system and onboarding new employees, making sure that they understand some of the base level information for their designated areas. This week we're going to be looking at approval maps. Next week we'll have a look at CRM marketing, and following week we'll be looking at financial statement creation. These classes are only offered to our clients, and they will be recorded and available to you at acumaticaengineering.com/maintenance classes. If you're looking to see what other topics are available, you can head over to acumaticaengineering.com/acumatica-training. It'll give you the whole schedule for the year. The good thing about these classes is that there's an opportunity to ask questions. So please use the question box to submit those questions, and depending on what we have time for, we will answer them during today's presentation. And if we're not able to address it today, then we will follow up with a video answer and post it to our blog, which also has lots of great information, acumaticaengineering.com/blog. So let's hop into what we're going to be talking about today and look at our agenda. So really, a lot of what we're going to be discussing today is giving, an overview of what are approval maps, what are assignment maps, and what are notifications. The topic is approval maps, but when we say approval maps, it encompasses, all three of these functions that Acumatica has built in. Um, for approvals, when a document moves over to somebody else to be approved, or some sort of a function in Acumatica is submitted and requires approval before it can go to the next stage. Assignments, so assigning over processes, and a good example there might be, issuing a purchase order can be done by purchasing or procurement clerk, and then it needs to be approved by somebody else. That will be an assignment. And then, of course, notifications based on those approval maps and assignment maps. Okay, next we're going to review a few of the standard approval maps that come with Acumatica in our setup, and then we'll have a look at how those maps work. So the map and the entity, what the steps encompass, as well as the conditions and rules that can be applied to those steps, and how the approval map will evaluate those certain triggers and actions that happen in the system on those types of entities. And an entity is going to be, the overarching component that's being worked on. So if we're working on time cards, time card is the entity. If we're working on AP bills, then AP bills, bills and purchasing are the entity, and so forth. So what are approval maps, assignment maps, and notifications? Well, approval maps are used for designating approvers to transactions. So bills, time cards, expense claims, and receipts, those all require some subsequent approval by either, in one step or even two steps. Assignment maps are used for assigning owners to transactions to further the processing. So an example might be within the CRM, which is a key area where assignment maps can be utilized. Rules, of course, are going to be set up for that, but an example might be, we have someone who develops a lead to an opportunity, but then we need someone to flush that opportunity out and, evaluate the details of that opportunity to see if it's a good fit for a project. And in that example might be where we have that lead developed to an opportunity by somebody in sales, but the opportunity being developed to a project, and being flushed out by a project manager. So when a lead develops to an opportunity, it may trigger an assignment to a project manager to now take it from that opportunity and try and convert it to a project. Notifications. The notifications are used for informing users of the specific information or change. So it could be an email, a text message, SMS, or some sort of dashboard alert. And it's a notification that's based on the approval or the assignment map setup. So the good thing about these approval maps and assignment maps is that it brings visibility and standardization to the approval process. It holds key people accountable to make sure that they're reviewing documents, reviewing um, transactions, and being notified accordingly of any new assignments as required. The potential here is for some some of the cons of this is that there is a potential for some time lag and bottleneck. And example of a typical bottleneck that we might see is if we have uh, employees or subcontractors entering time and there's a two-step approval for that time. So perhaps we have those employees who work on multiple projects and subcontractors working on multiple projects, and um, an initial approval is that the project manager of those projects need to approve those times. Um, and then it goes to the supervisor of the employee for final approval of the time card. Well, if you have a project manager that might be on vacation or might be away at an on-site and just is behind, um, on those approvals, then you may have an entire time card that's being held up by one project manager, and that may present some sort of a bottleneck. But we tend to make sure that those types of approvals are um, um, set up the best we can to avoid systematic bottlenecks, and making sure that notifications are sent out where appropriate for that. So that is one example. Okay, so standard approval maps that we're used to, um, you know, having a look at would be, time activities, time cards, expense claims, and even, perhaps receipts, pro forma invoices, taking project activity and developing a pro forma invoice that can be reviewed and approved before it's converted to an actual invoice. Of course, AP bills, project quotes, and change orders. Those are the typical approval maps that we see. And then, of course, there's other approval maps that are tied to more functional workflows of the organization, which would be, perhaps the procurement workflow. So, requesting product, requisition for those products or items, issuing a purchase order, and then a purchase receipt, which would then flow back to the AP bill and approval there. Okay. So time activities approval, there is no time activity approval map for time uh, that's built into the system. Within the project setup, we see that in this example, we have a project set up for vacation, if we have employees that want to enter vacation time on to their time activity card. And what we've done there is we've created tasks, and each task is then assigned to an approval for that task. So in this case, Paul is the approval for operations, and Sean is the approver for sales and marketing. So anybody that enters vacation on time activity, selecting the appropriate task, will trigger the routing for that approval to go based on the task. And that could also be set up for other projects and tasks if you wanted approvals to be based on those tasks. Okay, time cards. So, a lot of the following pages are going to be very similar, but essentially, with time card approval, it's going to be based on this entity of employee time cards. We've got a name set up, and then we have steps. And so each approval map has an entity, steps, conditions, and rules. In this particular case for time card, when we have an employee submit that time card, it triggers Acumatica to review the approval map and evaluate the conditions, and then the rules will be applied based on those conditions. So the standard rule here is that time cards will be routed to the supervisor of the employee for approval. And we see that right here. So employee from the document, and then we're looking at the employee supervisor. Okay. We're going to see a very similar setup for expense claims. So when an expense claim is submitted, it's going to trigger that event in Acumatica. Acumatica is going to review the conditions, and it's going to judge the next steps based on the rules. So here, an expense claim will be routed to the supervisor of the employee for approval. Okay. Pro forma invoice. So this is going to be based on the pro forma approval map, and it's triggered when a pro forma is taken off hold, not necessarily submitted. It's been taken off of hold. And when it takes off hold, in this case, we've got two different steps. So we've got projects with managers and other projects. So it's going to evaluate each of those conditions and apply the rule accordingly. And the rule action is to look at the employee from the document and then look at the project approver ID. So it's most likely the project manager. And in this case down below, we've got some reason settings that are set up because we find that pro forma invoices are typically generated by office staff or some sort of receivable staff. And then they're approved by project managers. But because there generally isn't a direct working relationship between those two in an office setting or something like that, we may want to set up reasons for those project managers to apply. So reason for approval. So if we want the project manager to provide a reason on why that pro forma invoice has been approved, we can require that. In this case, it's not prompted. But what is required is a reason for rejection. So if the project manager rejects the pro forma invoice, he or she will have to enter a reason on why it was rejected. So it provides that office staff back with some feedback on what may need to be corrected, what may need to be added, maybe the rates need to change, things of that nature, so that that pro forma invoice can be regenerated, resubmitted for the approval. Project quote approval is based on project quotes. It's going to be triggered when a quote is submitted. And the typical standard rule is that quotes are routed to a designated work group. And um, they're going to also require reasons for approval and rejection. So a work group here for a quote, instead of designating the approval to a specific employee, which may be in the time card case, it was the specific supervisor of the employee in this case, where we are looking to push this project quote to the finance work group. And when we've designated a work group rather than a specific employee, we're basically saying that whoever is in the work group of finance in this case can review this quote and approve it. So there may be 4 or 5 individuals in the finance work group. Any one of them can hop in, review this quote, and approve it. Change order approvals. So when a project is, when a project is changed and budgets are updated, um, that change order is taken off hold. That's what triggers Acumatica to look at this map. And change orders are routed to a designated work group. So in this case, we've designated a work group, but we've also designated a specific employee from that work group. So regardless of who the approver of the project is or who the supervisor of that project PM is, we want all change orders to go to finance work group and Maxwell Baker to be the person that it goes to. And Maxwell does not need to provide a reason for rejection here or reason for approval. So that's a standard rule here. So now that we've reviewed the standard approval maps that are in Acumatica, let's review on how does the mapping work. So each map has 4 main components. The meta info, which is basically this header info up here, is going to determine what is the map, what is the name of the map, and what entity or module component does it pull from. And entity type is going to play a key role in being able to decide or add conditions. And we'll review those following. The other thing here is that we see steps. And if you've got an older version of Acumatica, we have the tree. So adding the steps of evaluation. And then we have conditions. So each step will look at a condition. And if the condition is true, it will then look at the rule and what to do in the event that it's true. Okay. So in addition to the meta info, entity types listed are the only ones that we could use. So in this case, we're only able to develop approval maps for this list of items. So cash sales, pro forma invoices, projects, um, expense receipts, invoices, and memos. If there's something outside of this that requires an approval, it's not going to be embedded into this. The other thing is that you can have parallel maps that are defined in the module preferences. So in the accounts payable preferences, we've got 4 different types of AP transactions. We have bills, credit adjustments, debit adjustments, and prepayment rec. So for each of those, we can assign which ones are active, and of course, which approval map should each of those transaction types follow. And so we see that for bills, we're looking at AP bill multi-line approval. For credit adjustments, debit and prepayment, even though they're not active, if we decided to activate them, those would all flow through the AP bill approval, which may have different conditions and rules than the bill. So let's look at the steps, and we'll be hopping into Acumatica shortly to, look at this in a little bit more detail. But on this screenshot, we've got, we can have single step, which may be applied to all the documents that flow through, or we can have multiple steps, and each of those steps in order to proceed from one step to the next until there's an approval result, it may need to go through each of those steps to properly evaluate and determine who the approval should go to. This container here, this area, is going to hold the conditions for each of those steps, and of course, then the rules. If an approver is found, it will stop, and that's where the approval will go to. And generally, the last step has to deal with a situation where no approver is found. So in the event that no approver is found, you should always look to dictate some sort of approver. So maybe it goes to an executive or somebody, in this case, in AP bills, it'll go to some sort of a supervisor in the finance department. So whenever there is a last step that deals with this situation where no approver is found, you'll also want to be careful if you add steps after that, because if you add things after that, it may incorrectly halt or alter the approval map, where it goes to an executive, but it should have gone to somebody else because it didn't get to that step. Okay, so with rules, we've got conditions and we have actions or rule actions. So in this case, we're looking at consulting expenses. So whenever the condition is true, it's going to execute the action. Okay, and the action will determine whether a single individual should approve. So in time cards, we're looking at the employee supervisor, or it could be multiple people that we identify, or it could be a work group based on a tree. So the finance work group or the executive work group. The other thing with conditions is that the conditions that are available to be used are only those conditions that meet the needs of the entity chosen. So in this case, we've chosen bills and adjustments. If we look at the entity down here, we see AP transactions. We're not going to be able to find employee time card or expense receipt. We're only going to be seeing entity types that suit and fit within the bills and adjustments, overall entity umbrella. So let's have a look at Acumatica. And so approval maps are in the configuration under organization. We're going to hop in here. And so here we've got a list of approval maps, assignment maps, and then we've got assignment and approval. So let's have a look at approval maps only. And we were looking at that AP bill multi-line. Let that load. Perfect. So we've chosen bills and adjustments as the entity type, and here we've got 3 steps. So if I collapse all these are the 3 steps. We've got line approvals by department. I expanded things again because I clicked it, but we've got line approvals by department. The next step is it looks at vendor-specific approvals, so an external review. We have an internal review, an external review, and then we have a overall bill threshold approval. So if we look at the first step, line approvals by department. So we have departments within this organization, and those departments can be defined by something within the bill. So if we click on consulting, for instance, we see that if we look down here again, looking at the conditions, only these conditions are available for bills and adjustments. So bills and adjustments is tied to AP documents, transactions, approvals, employees, purchase order and receipt, and then vendor information. So in this case, I want the line approvals by department to look at the AP transaction and I want it to look at the sub-account of that AP transaction. And when that sub-account value equals 000 CON for consulting expenses, I want this rule, to be triggered. So in this case, for consulting expenses, Martin Bernia is going to be the approver. For warehouse expenses, we've got something similar, but when the sub-account equals warehouse, 000 WHS. Then we have Yona Jones approving. So we've got 5 different departments here with 5 different approvers. The next step is looking at the vendor-specific approvals. So in this case, we've identified a particular vendor, AA vendor. Now, instead of looking at the transaction, it's looking at the document. But whenever the vendor is AA vendor, we want Anna Johnson to approve it. We can also put in a step where it looks at the vendor class. And if the vendor class is products, we want operations Eric Cozy to approve it. And if the vendor class is a subcontractor, we want Martin Bernia to approve. So consulting and subcontractor, it's going to go to Martin Bernia here. The final step of approval is looking at the value of the document. So if the document has a value greater than $1,000, it's going to trigger an executive review to Michael Andrews. Let's have a look at another one. We saw that AP bills. Let's look at, there was an AP bill approval down here. So this is the one where credit adjustments, debit adjustments all flow through if they were active. So if we look at all bills and large bills, there is no conditions here. So all bills is when the AP document approver is empty. It'll go to Layla. For large bills, it's when the AP document amount is greater than 1,000, it goes to Michael Andrews. Let's go look at time cards, because those are very typical. Time card approval. So all time cards. So in this case, we see that there are no rules or conditions for in the particular all time card area here. Rather, it's based on the step itself. So because we want all time cards to be approved by the same person, there is no condition that needs to be met. It basically says all conditions are true. And so in that event, any time card that gets submitted is going to flow through to Michael Andrews for approval. Let's have a look at, let's see, pro forma. Okay, so we're looking at projects with managers. So when the project with manager, so when the project has a time activity approver that is not empty, it's going to go, oh, should go to somebody, but it's not set up here. And then other projects go to Maxwell Baker. This one isn't particularly set up. Not a good example. There was another one that we had here, change orders. see if we can find another good one here. Okay, it's not a very good one. Let's look at requisitions. Again, this is a very basic one. All requisitions are going to flow through Layla for approval. Expense receipt. Okay, here's a decent one. So boss approves large receipts. So first it's going to evaluate, okay, whether the receipt is over $2,000 or not. If the receipt is over $2,000, it's going to require approval by the supervisor of that employee. That condition is not true. If it's under 2,000, it will flow to the next step, which is determining if it's an office supply. So if the expense account equals 6,300, or the amount is greater than 200, it needs to be approved by Layla. And see, there are two conditions here that need to be true in order for this rule to apply. So the expense account references 63000, which is going to be for office supplies, and the amount must be greater than $200. If both of those conditions are met, Layla is required to approve that. If any of those conditions are not met, it will automatically flow through to a claim, unless, of course, it's over $2,000. Okay, so those are a few examples. Let's hop back into our presentation. Okay, so assignment maps. So we had a look at a few of the assignment maps, which are similar to roles, but we've got conditions versus actions here. And then when it meets the condition, it executes the action. The condition is always based on the map entity type. And again, the action, just like with our approval map, denotes whether a single person, multiple people, or a work group can approve or take action. Right, so that brings us to the end of approval maps review. Today we discussed approval maps, assignment maps, and notifications. We reviewed some of the standard approval maps, and we had a look at some of them in Acumatica to see how the conditions and rules are applied and can be met. We had a look at the map and entity, steps, conditions, and rules of those types. Again, applying approval maps is going to be very useful in standardizing processes within the organization. When they're set up correctly, things can flow through from person to person very efficiently. Let's have a look and see if there's any questions. Doesn't seem to be any. Okay. So again, thanks for joining today's class on approval maps. You'll find this recording at acumaticaengineering.com/maintenance-classes. Please join us next week for customer relationship management marketing, CRM marketing, and then the following week on June 15th for financial statement creation. Please also have a look at our blog for any other useful tips and videos, acumaticaengineering.com/blog. Thank you again. Have a good day.